The 40,000-year-old code, decoding the fabric technology that changed the fate of humanity. We are all victims of a great historical slander. Be honest with yourself. When I say the words prehistoric man, what image comes to mind? A hairy, stooped creature wielding a stone club and wearing a shabby animal skin? A rugged, wild survivor who hunted and gathered by instinct? That's the image that movies, textbooks, and even museums have planted in our minds for generations. But tonight, I'm here to tell you that image is an insult, a cruel distortion of the great minds who laid the foundations of our world. Because the shocking truth is, our ancestors were not just hunters, they were chemists, materials engineers, physicists, and masters of textile technology. And their greatest invention, the one that truly saved humanity, was not a sharp stone spear, but something much softer, more flexible, and more complex. A technology that we still use every day, but have completely forgotten its terrifying and magical origins. So let's turn the pages of history's coldest pace. Let's decode a 40,000-year-old forgotten technology. Let's discover the true story of how our ancestors, the geniuses, conquered the Ice Age, not with muscle, but with a thread. To understand the greatness of this invention, we must travel to a world almost unimaginable, a world ruled by a tyrant called the Ice Age. Don't just think of it as a long winter. Imagine it as a living entity, a white monster with icy breath that can shatter rocks, and its roar is a constant snowstorm. The ground is frozen kilometers deep. Food sources are desperately scarce. In that world, the greatest enemy is not saber-toothed tigers or mammoths, but the constant loss of body heat. Every moment of existence is a fight against the invasion of cold. The only defense technology our ancestors had at that time was skin and fur. It was a good idea in theory, but a disaster in practice. The science was simple. Fur traps a layer of air near the body to insulate. But this technology had fatal weaknesses. When it rained or snow melted, the animal's skin soaked up water, lost its insulating ability, and became a moving iceberg, sucking heat back from the body. When they exercised and sweated, the moisture could not escape, wetting the skin underneath, and then that sweat froze. Moreover, animal skin was difficult to work with. It was stiff, heavy, and could not be sewn into form-fitting clothes for children or flexible gloves for delicate work. Their armor was failing. Humans were losing the battle for survival. They needed a miracle. And that miracle, surprisingly, came from the silent world of plants. Imagine a gray afternoon after a failed hunt. A family huddled in a cave, the children crying from the cold. The mother, in despair, looked out at the snow-covered forest. Her gaze fell on a tree trunk struck by lightning, its outer bark torn away, revealing a silken underlayer, wet but supple. It was the prehistoric eureka moment, a crazy but hopeful idea. If you can skin animals, why not skin trees? They discovered the silk bark, or bast fiber, a hidden treasure. But to turn it into a usable material, they had to perform a process that we might call materials engineering today. But to them, it felt like a brutal ritual. First, there was the chemical stage. They soaked the silk bark strips in a running stream for weeks. This was no random act. They discovered that water would break down pectin and lignin, the natural glues that stiffen cell walls. Essentially, they were using microorganisms in the water to carry out a controlled biodegradation process. Next, there was the physical stage. Once the barks had softened, they placed them on flat rocks and began the most important part. With carefully crafted stone pestles, they pound, and pound. This is not a random pounding. It is a deliberate rhythm, a technique passed down from generation to generation. This mechanical force causes the tiny cellulose fibers to loosen, tangle, and rebond themselves, a process modern science calls felting. Imagine that sound echoing through the Ice Age forest, a steady thump, thump, not of war, but of hope. From something rigid and lifeless, a thin, light, and surprisingly strong non-woven fabric was born. It didn't absorb water like animal skin. It was more breathable, and it was light enough to create multiple layers of clothing. Magic had happened. The bark cloth was revolutionary, but it was only the prologue. The Homo sapiens' brain, once enlightened, would never stop asking questions. They realized that after all, this fabric was made up of tiny fibers. One question that changed everything was, why rely on random combinations of smashing when we can control each individual fiber? And that's when the smallest but most powerful god in the history of human technology was born: thread. They no longer saw nettles or flax as weeds. They saw them as mines of precious fiber. They developed techniques to separate, comb, and twist those tiny plant fibers into long, continuous, strong ropes. The invention of thread was the DNA of all future technologies. It was the beginning of ropes, of fishing nets, of bowstrings, and most importantly, it enabled a leap in understanding: weaving. With the most primitive looms, perhaps just 2 branches stuck into the ground, they invented the concept of warp and weft. They wove threads together in a pattern, creating a purposeful, interconnected structure. A new world opened up. Textiles were softer, warmer, could be made in varying thicknesses, and could be dyed with clay and berries. For the first time, humans were making more than just clothes. They were making fashion. They were making symbols. They could create blankets for babies, bags to carry food, and even the first sails to cross the seas. They were no longer just creatures responding to their environment. They had become engineers. The invention of textiles changed our destiny forever. It was more important than fire. Fire allowed us to heat a place, but clothing allowed us to carry our own warmth with us wherever we went. It was this technology that unlocked the entire planet. It allowed small groups of people to leave Africa, travel across the frozen steppes of Siberia, cross the Beringia land bridge, and settle across the Americas. It allowed them to survive the harshest European winters. Textiles became one of the first commodities of trade, creating wealth, fostering cultural exchange, and building complex social structures. Every great civilization, from Egypt to Mesopotamia to China, was built on the foundation of agriculture and textiles. And that legacy is still here, right now. Look down at the shirt you are wearing. It is not just a product of a factory. It is the end of a 40,000-year journey. In each thread is the wisdom of the woman who discovered the secret of the bark. In each stitch is the skill of the craftsman who spun the first thread. In the warmth it brings is an echo of the fight for survival against the white tyrant. So my appeal today is simple. The next time you see something ordinary, a ceramic bowl, a piece of metal, your own clothes, stop for a second. Try to look for the invisible threads of history, of forgotten creativity. The world around us is not ordinary. It is a great museum of genius inventions. And we, all of us, are the heirs. Share in the comments below, which forgotten invention in everyday life do you admire the most? Let's celebrate the great minds that have come before us. Subscribe to the channel to learn more about the history of sewing from ancient times to modern times. Thanks for listening.